Oh my god!
Welcome to Funky Flicks Film Reviews, and today we're going to talk about A Quiet Place Part 2. Now, admittedly, my review for the first film was a tad extreme.
Good did cat keep coming from?
So yeah, I went a bit far with that one, so this will be a straight up review. Now, while I'm not going to do anything to spoil this film, I will enter into some spoilery territory for the first film in order to explain the context of this one in terms of the things I want to talk about. So, A Quiet Place Part 2 begins with a flashback, one which indicates how the creatures from the story arrived on Earth in what seems like a meteor or several, and anyone not familiar with the first film, these creatures are weird alien animal stalking monster things that seem to be blind. I don't think they have a sense of smell, but they operate entirely on sound. Basically, they hear you, they hunt you, they find you, they kill you. Straight away, we're reintroduced to the family we got to know in the last film, but in happier times in this flashback before anything really occurred. Evelyn and Lee Abbot, played by Emily Blunt and John Krasinski, who directed both movies. And their daughter Regan, their deaf daughter, teenage daughter Regan, played by Millicent Simmonds, and their two sons, all of whom are attending a baseball game, a kids' baseball game. Also at this baseball game is Cillian Murphy, who is attending the game with his sons, and his presence becomes more important later on. After a shocking and thrilling, horrific first contact with the aliens that's going to change the lives of these townsfolk forever, we then return to the end of the last film, sort of the following day after the last film, but over a year later past the flashback itself. A Quiet Place Part 1 was a brilliantly lean horror film which established several things ingeniously. Most importantly, the fact that the family, having adapted for years to their daughter's deafness, the whole family having adapted to Regan's deafness, in that they were able to utilize sign language and communicate physically, gave them a bit of a leg up in this unique horror new world scenario. Now, It's a bit of a gimmick, but it's a brilliantly utilized gimmick, and one which sets up the deaf character as central to the narrative. The other thing A Quiet Place Part 1, should we call it, does very well is through a terrible loss early on in the film, frames the narrative as much about a family going through the dynamics of loss and guilt and disturbing feelings of, was it my fault? Did you do this? And it's more as much about that as it is about spooky apocalyptic monsters going bump in the night. Although there is plenty of running and jumping and scurrying and crawling through the cornfields in the night with a torch when you shouldn't be making noise, and probably the most thrilling, terrifying part of the movie is the birth of a baby in a bathtub as creatures scurry about in the background, and the world's most horrific and annoying nail. By the end of the first film, the family has suffered another terrible but incredibly heroic loss through sacrifice. And no sooner has that happened, but Regan has discovered that an experimental hearing aid her father was working on for her has the ability to disrupt these creatures and, really damage them, especially when amplified. Now, coming into part 2, Emily Blunt's Evelyn must now take her family, having just given birth, must take her family and leave their burning homestead with a baby in a box and find somewhere else to live and others who may be able to help them utilize this new weapon. By a process, this brings them into contact with Cillian Murphy's Emmett, who they haven't seen for well over a year. He rescues them from an attack by the creatures and brings them to his own soundproof chamber deep beneath this foundry they've wandered into. However, Emmett has suffered so many losses of his own in the 400 and something days since the start of the film, since that flashback period, that he's become a kind of cynical, broken, not entirely sure if you can trust him or not, archetypal apocalyptic character, somewhere pitched between the character Murphy played in 28 Days Later meets Mad Max kind of thing. Very soon, Regan discovers there's a means to utilize her weapon and broaden its range, and goes off on a quest to do exactly that in her own kind of John Connor-esque quest to take the fight to the enemy. Now, the question on your mind will be, is part 2 as good as the first film? Well, no, not quite. Well, not the same good. Because by placing Regan as the central character, it changes the whole dynamic and becomes a whole very different film, a good film, but different. Now, the unique and clever sound design from the original film by Erica Dahl and Ethan Van Der Ven, I think there's somebody else attached to this one as well. That continues quite nicely. I don't know if it was quite as good. I mean, the first film accommodated it more. It was all diegetic sound, and this is a faster paced film. So although that you get these little tweaks and bits, it's not as much the focus of the movie, but it is present and it is used to great effect. Marco Beltrami's score is as good as the first film. It might be a little more bombastic, a little more present due to the faster pacing of the film, but it's, I'm particularly fond of Beltrami's work on The Wolverine, Logan, and The Three Barrels of Malika's Estrada, the Tommy Lee Jones directed film. I've always been fond of the way he uses music as more sound design than just manipulative score. Interestingly enough, in the way that the first film was a family drama about loss, this film gives that kind of narrative, that redemption, dealing with loss, grief narrative to another character. John Krasinski's direction of tension and evolving drama remains as strong as it was in the previous film. And in terms of tension and thrills, there are plenty of sort of similar scenes to that goddamn nail moment in the first one, whereby you've got things like, where to put your feet when sneaking through a window so you don't make noise, or a locking mechanism that, if inappropriately utilized, can mean life or death. And plenty of kind of, gotta do a thing or else the thing we gotta do can't get done if we don't do it now, blah, 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 blah. So all of that kind of, energy and tension is very much intact. Emily Blunt has quite a lot to do early on in the film as the, doting survival mother full of compassion and resolve, and then veers into more of an action-orientated role as the story goes on. There's not much of an arc in that, but Noah Jupe, playing Evelyn's son, Marcus, has quite a bit more of an arc of, he was understandably terrified and freaked out in the first film, and he gets more of a kind of character development arc in this one. But this is Millicent Simmonds' film, where Regan not only becomes the protagonist moving forward, but is now my favourite on-screen cinema version of John Connor. And please, anybody in charge of any more Terminator prequel sequels, this is what you should have done with the character in the first place. Also, in terms of creating a progressive character, or plausibly realistic character in a progressive role, it's this is also how you do that, where it's not progressive, it's good storytelling. You don't even notice. The job gets done. With this film, A Quiet Place is now obviously a franchise, and there are some logical loose ends, like, what are these creatures after the meteor thing, where are they just an occurrence or the first wave of an attack? Where do they come from? What's going to happen next? But at its heart, the Quiet Place films are about loss and the human spirit, and the effects of loss on the human spirit, and the battle of the human spirit to survive. And as long as that retains, I think it could make an excellent ongoing series. Or to put it another way, I liked it. I wasn't sure a sequel could work. This one did work. I could watch more. And whatever flick you end up watching, and wherever you end up watching it, I hope it's worth talking about.
I don't know why you came all the way up here.
There's nothing left.
Please. There are people out there worth saving.
You don't know, do you? I do. The people that are left, they're not the kind of people worth saving.